So the field of psychiatry has grown and developed significantly over the past 3 to 4 decades. We've seen this, the emergence of biological psychiatry, which has illuminated many disorders and the underpinnings of them. And what's happened in psychiatry over the last several decades has actually also strengthened psychotherapy. There are now multiple forms of psychotherapy that are effective and in conjunction with psychopharmacology are improving the lives of patients. Having said that, there are many areas that could be improved. And if we take a giant step backwards, I think one way in which we could kind of holistically improve the field of psychiatry is to gain a better understanding of the foundational science that underlies these disorders. In other words, can we find, and I think we should strive to find, the unified sort of biological roots of depression, anxiety, mania, schizophrenia, autism, ADHD, et cetera, et cetera. So is that possible? I believe it is. The field of psychiatry today, despite the vast amount of knowledge we have about the biological mechanisms and many of the social and other factors that shape mental health and mental illness, what we still don't have is a kind of a foundational science to explain it. Evolutionary psychiatry is an emerging field that holds promise to provide that foundational structure. On what basis am I saying this? Well, if we go back to 1973, which is really a seminal year in I believe, in evolutionary psychiatry, because not only was it the year that 3 animal behaviorists, who today we would call evolutionary biologists, won the Nobel Prize in medicine, but also it was the year that Theodosius Dobzhansky, published his now famous essay, "Nothing in Biology Makes Sense Outside the Light of Evolution." Well, what is psychiatry if not the biology of human behavior, human emotion, etc.? So nothing in psychiatry can make sense outside the light of evolution, and therefore, if we can identify the evolutionary origins of psychiatric disease, mental illness, and mental health, if we can do that, then we really have an opportunity to deeply understand and then hopefully innovate both prevention strategies and treatments that we've never been able to have before. So today, one of the criticisms of modern psychiatric practice, and it's a self-criticism, is that we are limited in our diagnostic abilities. Most psychiatric diagnoses are not made using, let's say, an EKG, which can diagnose a heart attack. You can look at it, and whether you're a cardiologist in Nashville, Tennessee, or in Istanbul, there's a universality to that. Or looking under the microscope and seeing, gram-positive cocci clusters, and you know what the bacterial infection is. Okay, we don't have that in psychiatry. We still rely on the diagnostic statistical manual, which is primarily focused on the expression of symptoms and a kind of quite subjective collection of symptoms and characteristics. We need to move beyond that. Evolutionary psychiatry can lead us in that direction, and I believe actually ultimately provide the path to arriving at more objective, biologically rooted diagnostic criteria. What do I mean by that? So one example would be depression. So of course the word depression is used colloquially to describe sort of a down mood, but as a psychiatrist, what we're talking about really is clinical depression. So let's talk about one form, which is major depressive disorder, where we have a series of symptoms, but one collection of symptoms are these neurovegetative symptoms of depression. Patients with neurovegetative symptoms of depression are profoundly slowed in their motor function. They are exhausted. They express the inability sometimes to even get out of bed. They can have physical pain as well. And of course, there's cognitive slowing. So these are profoundly physical. They're physiological symptoms. What evolutionary psychiatry offers is a new way of understanding neurovegetative symptoms. One strategy, and this is part of a research project that I have, is to look at non-human animals who appear to have neurovegetative-like symptoms in association with certain experiences that produce neurovegetative depression in humans. One of these is a model called social defeat. And this is done in the lab with, it's done with mice, so it's done in mammals, but it's also done increasingly in zebrafish and actually other fish species, where we see recurrent social defeat, an individual who is recurrently experiencing interactions with peers, with conspecifics in a negative sense, falling in the social ladder. Recurrent social defeat in some individuals produces a behavior, it's called depressive-like behavior, that is highly aligned with neurovegetative depression. These are animals that are physically withdrawn. Their motor function is profoundly slowed. They're not interested in eating and in mating and in socializing, what we call on the human side anhedonia. We have this parallel. Now, what's so interesting about this is that when we see neurovegetative depression in a human, a patient we might have met who is so ill and in danger, there is absolutely no way to conceptualize an adaptive benefit to that behavior. It is profoundly maladaptive in that individual. However, an evolutionary psychiatrist can turn their attention to this teleost fish who is also withdrawn, profoundly slowed motorically. We don't know cognitively, but let's assume just even slowed physically, and can begin to ask a question, what might be adaptive about that behavior? And it turns out there is now evidence that that slowed and withdrawn behavior may actually be a form of hiding that can confer temporary safety to an animal who is surrounded by danger, either dangerous peers, sort of dominant fish, let's say, or other environmental threats. Once you establish that this is the adaptive benefit, that there is adaptive benefit of this neurovegetative state in a fish, and you link that neurobiology to the human biology of neurovegetative depression, which we now can do thanks to gene expression, this revolution in not only comparative genomics, but the analysis of genomes and gene expression in these states. Once we see that these states are highly aligned, it transforms everything. Because all of a sudden, even though depression in your patient is so maladaptive and so hard to conceive of as conferring any benefit at all, we can understand that it is a modern human manifestation of an ancient safety survival strategy. And once you understand that the transcriptomic signature of that fish and what we see in neurovegetative depression are aligned, I mean, the question isn't, well, is depressive-like behavior in a fish really human depression, which has historically been the question people ask. That's the wrong question. As evolutionary biologists, that's not our question. Our question is we understand that whatever human depression is, it derived from, the neurobiology is in a continuum with fish neurobiology. The only question is how conserved that neurobiology is. And once we establish how conserved it is, then the question as to whether the behavioral phenotype is aligned in the human is aligned with the behavioral phenotype in the fish, it's obvious that it is.
Yeah.
And today, it's 2025, psychiatry and psychiatric diseases are still considered somehow separate from other medical disorders. And within that separateness, much negativity arises from stigma, to a lack of funding, to a general disregard, a kind of a perception that the field is other in a negative sense. by identifying the foundational biological roots, and by that I mean by identifying in our evolutionary history as social animals, the neurobiology that in the modern human produces psychiatric illness. By doing that and having that biological foundation, we will inevitably be able to produce solutions and strategies and treatments that are more effective, and importantly, bring psychiatry together with the other fields of medicine, ideally reducing stigma that compounds the suffering of depression, and really sparking a renaissance of not only treatments, but even preventative strategies for human mental health. Evolution, for most students, certainly you go to the Museum of Natural History when you're in elementary school and you see fossils. And maybe in college you study ancient DNA. And none of it seems to do with behavior. And certainly it seems to have nothing to do with emotion. What evolutionary psychiatry begins to reveal is that much about our present condition, and I'm talking about everything from what our motivation might be today to exercise or stick with our diet, to how we feel when we lose someone we love. All of those things are part of evolution, and that when we are looking at those bones, at that skull, what we're actually looking at is the ancient and concrete piece of ourselves, our emotional selves, our behavioral selves. That connection and that continuity is not abstract at all. It's deeply personal.